You know that feeling, right? You read a headline that says, inflation is cooling, unemployment is low, the market's looking up. But then you open your bank statement or you just look at the cost of your weekly groceries, and
Yeah.
the numbers just don't seem to match the optimism. There's this real economic anxiety that the official metrics aren't quite capturing.
It's a constant disconnect, isn't it? That gap between the big, macroeconomic data points and the daily lived reality of what things actually cost.
Right.
And that dissonance is exactly why it's so hard for policymakers, say, in Washington, to really get a handle on the mood of the consumer.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're trying to cut right through that noise. We're looking at the complex outlook for 2026, drawing from a really insightful fireside chat with the chief economist behind the Armada Report. He's known for translating this incredibly dense data into things you can actually use. So we're covering it all, from inflation to robotics to global risks. Okay, let's just unpack this right away. If the rate of inflation has stabilized, why do people still feel so bad about prices?
Well, we're currently sitting at an inflation rate that's on the high end of what's historically called creeping. It's not, a crippling, galloping rate or anything like that. But the pain is so acute because of where that inflation has been concentrated.
Meaning it's not just the things we might think of as, I don't know, optional annoyances, right?
Exactly. Think about past inflationary periods. You'd see spikes in university tuition or maybe some niche services. And those are annoying for sure, but they don't affect every single person's ability to eat or drive to work.
Yeah.
This time, the price hikes have been just relentless in the non-negotiables. Bread, dairy, vegetables, basic household stuff. When the price of milk jumps 20%, you feel that immediately, whether you're at the top of the income ladder or the bottom.
And that feeds directly into what the Economist in our source material called the bifurcation effect. It's like a stark split in the U.S. economy,
It is. It's almost two different worlds running in parallel.
like two separate economies.
Absolutely. And the car dealer analogy they use just illustrates this perfectly. If you're in, say, the lower third of the economy, those inflated food and energy costs are they're eating you alive. You're living paycheck to paycheck, and you are definitely not thinking about buying a new car. You're just trying to get by.
But for the upper third, it's a completely different story. They see these price increases as something else entirely.
It's just an annoyance. Or in some bizarre cases, it actually becomes a status amplifier.
What do you mean by that?
Well, The Economist mentioned this luxury car model. The price was hiked by $40,000 up to $120,000.
And you'd think that would deter people.
You would. But instead, it made the car more desirable. The higher price reinforced its exclusivity. It became an even bigger status symbol to have sitting in the driveway.
Wow.
So for them, inflation is less of a deterrent and more like a premium access charge.
That makes a lot of sense. And if the cost of basics is driving this wedge, this is where it gets really interesting for me. You can connect that cost pressure directly to the housing affordability crisis. Because if the local cost of living is just crushing you, well, now you have an escape route that just didn't exist 20 years ago.
Remote work, it has completely changed the American migration map. We're seeing a genuine mass exodus from high-cost, high-tax states to places where your money just goes dramatically further.
And the difference isn't small, is it? It's a huge gap.
The contrast is staggering. The report suggests a single person might need, say, $120,000 a year for a comfortable life in a big California city.
Okay.
But that same quality of life, or maybe even better, you could get that in a place like Fargo, North Dakota for maybe $50,000. That $70,000 difference is impossible to ignore.
And this isn't just a theory. We're seeing real towns, places that were maybe quiet before, being completely transformed by this.
Absolutely. Take Laurel, Mississippi, or parts of the Midwest. The Economist noted that something like 80% of Laurel's current residents are remote workers. They're keeping their high coastal salaries.
While enjoying a much, much lower cost of living.
Exactly. Or you have the Chicago worker who can now have a fantastic quality of life in Des Moines. Or the consultant in California who just rents a cheap little studio in Sacramento for the 1 or 2 days a month they need to show up in person. The rest of the time, they're living and spending their money in Utah or Arizona.
Which means national data is becoming, I guess, less relevant than looking at these specific local hotspots.
It really is.
So this all ties back into the U.S. consumption engine. We're still seeing really strong spending despite all this anxiety. We know the inventory issues, that whole overstocking thing from the tariff and pandemic period, that's finally resolved. Inventory to sales ratios are mostly normal. In fact, retail's apparently set for a record holiday season, maybe hitting $1 trillion for the first time.
And that stability, combined with the huge surge in online ordering, has fundamentally changed logistics. It's an interesting side effect. And you know who's driving a lot of that online purchasing?
Not just the younger generations, I take it.
Not at all. It's the boomer generation. Their shopping habits were just fundamentally altered during the pandemic, and they've stuck with it.
So the boomer shift to e-commerce, which is all about rapid delivery, that has ripple effects beyond just Amazon's stock price.
Precisely. The whole transportation sector has had to reorient. It's moving away from long-haul trucking with huge containers going to a central warehouse and more toward rail and air freight, which are better for fast, precise, and, dispersed delivery. It's a whole different infrastructure.
But let's get back to the consumer. Because despite the anxiety and the cost of necessities, the Economist seems very confident about consumption staying strong into 2026. What are the big drivers there? I think there are three.
The first one, and it's maybe the most surprising, is this boomer spending phenomenon. As that generation hits retirement, they're looking at their highly appreciated investments and thinking about taxes. If they pass those on, their kids face a big tax burden.
So the smart move financially is to liquidate the assets and spend the money now. You control the wealth transfer, and you sidestep some of those taxes.
That's the calculation, and the anecdote they shared was perfect. This friend who bought his grandson an ocean-going yacht.
The grandson who lives in Nebraska, landlocked Nebraska.
Exactly. The point isn't for the grandson to use the yacht. The point is for him to sell it immediately. The money transfers, and it avoids certain tax structures. It's a huge driver for luxury goods.
Okay, so that's driver number one. What's the second?
It goes back to the labor market. It's the leverage that skilled workers have right now. This labor shortage gives them immense job security and bargaining power, and that confidence is a macroeconomic driver all by itself.
If you know you can get another job tomorrow, you're not going to save every penny.
You're going to spend. You're going to feel secure. Remember that story about the job applicant who literally put his feet up on the hiring manager's desk?
Yeah, the one who said, "You have 5 minutes to decide because I have 14 other interviews today."
That is just... It's an incredible, unprecedented level of confidence, and it translates directly into spending.
And the third driver is, well, it's just purely cultural, isn't it? Something very American.
It is. It's our tendency to spend our way out of trouble. Historically, when analysts predict a recession, the American consumer doesn't do what a Japanese or Chinese consumer might do, which is hoard cash and get super frugal.
Right.
The American attitude is more like, uh-oh, I might lose my job, so I'd better buy that big screen TV now while I still can, or remodel the kitchen, or take that big trip.
And that behavior has actually stopped predicted recessions in the past.
It's deterred 6 of them. It's a unique collective psychology that you have to account for.
So high confidence, high leverage, that's all great for the worker. But you said this leverage leads directly to the biggest domestic risk for 2026, the skill gap.
That's right. It is a genuine crisis for sustained economic growth. And the skill gap isn't about a general lack of people. It's a lack of key skilled people. Manufacturers are struggling so badly that The Economist mentioned a company that was recruiting 98-year-olds out of retirement.
98, just to keep that institutional knowledge on the factory floor.
Exactly, to maintain production capacity. It's an unbelievable situation.
So what's driving this huge imbalance in the workforce?
Well, the educational system is, to be blunt, producing people trained for a world that doesn't really exist anymore. We have this oversupply of college grads in very, very niche academic fields. The Economist specifically mentioned people with degrees focusing on Beowulf studies.
Okay.
Meanwhile, the trade schools can't keep up with demand for the jobs the economy actually needs. They talked about a welding program with a 300-person wait list.
And it wasn't because of a lack of students wanting to get in.
No, it was because they physically lacked the infrastructure to train that many people safely. And those students, they're getting hired the day they start the program.
Which is why that story about the lawyer brother having to borrow money from his plumber brother, it just hit so hard.
It perfectly highlights this reversal of traditional economic value. High-wage, high-demand jobs are not just for those with a 4-year degree anymore.
And this has huge implications for our immigration strategy. The focus used to be on non-skilled labor, especially for agriculture. But mechanization is changing that whole equation.
Completely. The Economist told a story about a farmer friend who manages 12,000 acres all by himself.
Wow.
with a computer and GPS-guided equipment. That kind of automation means the need for non-skilled farm labor is just dropping like a rock. So the focus has to shift, and shift entirely, to expanding visas for skilled labor, the H-1B visas, to bring in top engineering, medical, and tech talent.
Because right now we're losing that race.
We're losing that race for talent to countries like China in robotics, and even the Middle East for top medical professionals.
Okay, let's pivot to the market. We had this very narrow rally, mostly in tech stocks, and that always leads to talk of a bubble. How much of this is really driven by AI right now?
AI is definitely the catalyst, but its current use isn't what most people think. The Economist, who used to be a professor, sees it as a fantastic research assistant. It's like having 15 grad students working for you around the clock. The problem is it generates this massive amount of information, but it has no inherent discernment.
So it gives you speed, but it doesn't give you judgment.
Exactly. It's incredibly fast at analysis, which is its breakthrough value, but it still pulls in, well, crap information right alongside the good data. The need for a human filter is still massive. The partner they mention, who has to ask Perplexity 100 questions just to synthesize the right answer.
Yeah.
That shows you that AI isn't replacing the human mind. It's accelerating the analysis cycle so that decision makers can act faster.
That said, AI is probably just the opening act for the next huge market driver. The report predicts that's going to be robotics.
This is the big forecast. The prediction is that by the end of this decade, 1 out of every 3 households will own a domestic robot.
For what? Cooking? Cleaning?
Cooking, cleaning, and the big one, caregiving.
The economics of caregiving with an aging population, that makes this prediction really compelling.
Look at the cost difference. A good assisted living facility can run you $7,000 a month, easy. A high-quality robot, one that can help with mobility and basic care, might cost $8,000 total, one time.
That's a huge difference.
And the technology's getting there. The anecdote about the hospital robot that gently picked up the Economist after he fell out of bed, it shows we're approaching maturity. Robotics is just primed to solve a massive market problem in elder care.
All right, let's shift to monetary policy. We've seen some very public dissent at the Fed lately. So what does all this mean for interest rates heading into 2026?
Well, the media tends to focus way too much on Jerome Powell. He's mostly the institutional manager, the regulatory guy. If you want to know the economic direction, you have to look at the powerful economists who are really driving the policy.
And who are the key players right now?
Primarily, it's Chris Waller, he's the dominant economist, and also Mickey Bowman, who is the main advocate for small and regional banks. They're both pushing for preemptive rate cuts, maybe as much as 125 basis points over the next year.
Why so much so soon?
Because they know that rate cuts take a long time, sometimes 12 to 18 months, to fully percolate through the economy and actually impact conditions in 2026.
But the Fed's decision-making is about to get more complicated next year.
It is. The Fed depends on this rotation of regional bank presidents. They're the eyes and ears on the ground, providing all that real-world data for the Beige Book. Next year, 4 new presidents rotate onto the board, and 3 of them are known hawks.
Meaning they're more inclined to keep rates higher to fight inflation.
Exactly. So that dynamic is going to slow things down. The prediction is we'll probably see 1 more cut this year, maybe 50 or 75 basis points, and then maybe another small one in early 2026. But that transition is going to create some turbulence.
Let's move to the really big picture now, the macroeconomic risks. Starting with the national debt, it's around 130% of GDP, way over the 60% that experts say is stable. That sounds terrifying. But the U.S. bond market is still really strong.
The bond market strength is the key.
Yeah.
We are still, by far, the safest place in the world to park your money. And something like 60% of our debt is owned by the U.S. government itself or the Fed. So the problem isn't our ability to sell the debt. The problem is the crippling cost of servicing it.
The interest payments on the debt.
It's now $500 billion a year, $500 billion. It's the 5th largest category in the entire federal budget. The source material calls it a chronic disease because it prevents the country from doing necessary large-scale projects. Think of the opportunity cost.
Right.
They discussed a hypothetical canal costing $180 billion to move water from the Great Lakes to refill Lake Mead and solve the Western water crisis. That money just isn't there. It's being eaten up by interest payments.
And politically, there's no easy solution. You can't really cut entitlements, and you can't raise taxes enough to fix it.
That's the reality. You can't cut Social Security or Medicare because older people vote. and they vote reliably, so Social Security won't stop. When the dedicated fund runs out, it'll just do what the UK, Italy, and Germany did.
Which is?
Finance it from general revenue instead of the specific trust fund. The spending continues, and the debt service just remains this constant drag on the economy.
On the global stage, we hear this constant chatter about the U.S. dollar losing its reserve currency status. Is that a real risk anytime soon?
No, not really. The dollar is stable because no other country is willing or even able to step up and take its place.
What about the euro or the yuan?
Look at who's behind those currencies. Fiercely export-driven nations. Germany is 58% dependent on exports. If the euro became the world's reserve currency, it would get much stronger. That would make German cars and machinery more expensive everywhere else.
And they would never do that to themselves.
They'll never deliberately sabotage their own economic model. So while you'll see more non-dollar trading, no major power actually wants the dollar's job. They don't want the responsibility or the economic cost of it.
What about trade protectionism? We hear a lot about tariffs, but the source material really downplays them, calls them clumsy.
They are clumsy. They're mostly political negotiation tools. We saw that when the U.S. had to quietly walk back tariffs on Brazilian copper and coffee after U.S. industries pushed back hard.
So what's the real power in trade protection?
It's in non-tariff barriers, or NTBs. These are regulatory barriers, and they account for about 75% of all market protection. They're highly effective and almost impossible to challenge.
Can you give me an example of how an NTB works?
Sure. Think about safety standards. The U.S. might impose such strict standards on toys that it blocks cheap Chinese imports that pose a choking hazard. That's an NTB. Or the EU can impose really strict rules on pesticides and GMOs in agriculture, which just happens to block a lot of very competitive U.S. farm goods from their market.
And it's all framed as consumer protection.
Right, which makes it politically and legally very solid.
So finally, what's the #1 international risk we should be watching for in 2026?
The biggest risk is the power vacuum. It's been created by the U.S. pulling back from its role as the, world policeman. Without a major power keeping a lid on things, regional skirmishes are allowed to get out of control. We're seeing it with the rising nuclear tensions between India and Pakistan.
And the rest of the world is reacting to this vacuum, specifically Europe rearming itself.
It's an aggressive shift. Germany has committed $100 billion to rebuild its military. And Sweden, historically neutral Sweden, has not only joined NATO, but they've surfaced 37 nuclear-tipped submarines as a very visible deterrent. This is Europe getting ready for a world where they can't just assume immediate U.S. support.
On a final geopolitical note, could you briefly touch on the situation in Venezuela?
It's a classic tragic dictatorship. Maduro is, to use the term from the source, an intellectually limited dictator. His followers know that if the regime falls, they likely face execution, so they cling to power. But the interesting part is this. Nearly half of Venezuela's educated, wealthy population fled.
To places like Miami and Texas.
Right. And they are capitalized, ready, and waiting to go back and start rebuilding the country the second the political environment changes.
That brings us to the end of our deep dive. If we had to synthesize the core tension for the U.S. economy going into 2026, what would you say it is?
I'd say the near-term strength of the U.S. economy is really propped up by our incredibly resilient consumer base and that powerful, high-leverage labor market. But that stability is under a severe long-term threat from two chronic diseases: the crippling drag of the national debt service and this existential skill shortage crisis.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. For me, the thing that really sticks is understanding how our unique American cultural quirk to spend our way out of trouble has actually become a verifiable, measurable macroeconomic force.
And that leads to a final provocative thought for you to mull over. If the single greatest long-term economic risk is this lack of skilled labor, how quickly can the U.S. education system possibly pivot? Right now, we are training thousands of students in niche academic fields with minimal job prospects, while the economy is screaming for highly paid trade skills, welders, plumbers, HVAC technicians, the very people we need to sustain our infrastructure and to power this coming robotics revolution.